Let's start summary and analysis chapter 41. Before this, please visit rest of the two videos which are talking about the chapter wise summary from chapter 1 to 12, video 1, and then chapter 13 to 40, video 2. And this is in the third video in the category, and that is starting from 41 to, and it's going to end in chapter 67. So this will be the complete chapter wise summary in 3 videos of Bleak House. Please watch and listen the videos carefully, and this will give you complete idea about Bleak House. Now let's start summary and analysis chapter 41. Upstairs in Tuckinghorn's room, Lady Dedlock confronts the lawyer. She demands to know why he told her story to so many persons. Tuckinghorn says that he wanted her to know that he was in on secret. She indicates that she plans to leave Chesney Wold but wants to spare Sir Leicester any unnecessary pain. Tuckinghorn's sole consideration in this unhappy case is Sir Leicester, but as he has not yet decided how to act upon his discovery of Lady Dedlock's secret, he says that at least for a while he will keep the matter to himself. Tuckinghorn goes to sleep. Lady Dedlock, distraught, peace for hours in her room. The next morning, the Dedlock house's place of bustling hospitality. Summary. Upstairs in Tuckinghorn's room, Lady Dedlock confronts the lawyer. She demands to know why he told her story to so many persons. Tuckinghorn says that he wanted her to know that he was in on the secret. That she indicates that she plans to leave Chesney Wold but wants to spare Sir Leicester any unnecessary pain. Tuckinghorn's sole consideration in this unhappy case is Sir Leicester, but as he has not yet decided how to act upon his discovery of Lady Dedlock's secret, he says that at least for a while he will keep the matter to himself. Tuckinghorn goes to sleep. Lady Dedlock, distraught, paced for hours in her room. The next morning, the Dedlock house is a place of bustling hospitality. Analysis. Lady Dedlock makes a momentous decision. Tragedy is fully upon her. Tuckinghorn's inflexibility and lack of affection and compassion are more impressive than ever. Dickens foreshadows the lawyer's imminent but unexpected death. The morning light finds Tuckinghorn at his oldest. He looks as if the digger and spade were both commissioned and would soon be digging. Summary and analysis chapter 42. Returning to London, Tuckinghorn meets Snagsby. The latter complains of being harassed by Lady Dedlock's former servant, Hortense. She is frantic to find Tuckinghorn. When she does locate him, she protests bitterly at having been used by him. She now sees that she was tricked into giving him information when dressed as Lady Dedlock. She was presented to Little Joe. She demands that the lawyer get her a new position, otherwise she will bound her forever if necessary. He tells her he will have her imprisoned if she visits either him or Snagsby once more. Undaunted, she leaves. The lawyer enjoys a bottle of old wine, and now and then, as he throws his head back in the chair, he catches sight of pertinacious Roman pointing from the ceiling. Summary. Returning to London, Tuckinghorn meets Snagsby. The latter complains of being harassed by Lady Dedlock's former servant, Hortense. She is frantic to find Tuckinghorn. When she does locate him, she protests bitterly at having been used by him. She now sees that she was tricked into giving him information when dressed as Lady Dedlock. She was presented to Little Joe. She demanded that the lawyer get her a new position, otherwise she will hound him forever if necessary. She tells her he will have her imprisoned if she visits either him or a Snagsby once more. Undaunted, she leaves. The lawyer enjoys a bottle of old wine, and now and then, as he throws his head back in the chair, he catches sight of pertinacious Roman pointing from the ceiling. Analysis. Tuckinghorn's bitter encounter with Hortense makes the reader sense that more will come of this incident. This impression is reinforced by Dickens' use of foreshadowing. At the very end of the preceding chapter, Tuckinghorn is pictured complacent and then asleep, yet somehow looking very old, and in fact, Not far from that, the present chapter closes with a Tuckinghorn who, though again complacent, catches sight of an arrow welding, Roman point painted on the ceiling. Summary and analysis, chapter 43. For fear of increasing her mother's peril, for fear of increasing her mother's peril, Esther refrains from writing to her and trying to see her. Worried about Skimpole's influence on Richard, she and Ada discuss their situation with Mr. Jarndyce. Jarndyce says that in order to understand Skimpole better, the three of them should visit the infant in his home. This home where Skimpole lives with his sickly wife and three daughters is a dirty, dingy, dilapidated place. Mr. Jarndyce asks Skimpole to refrain from allowing Richard to give him any money or buy anything for him. Skimpole introduces his daughter, who were much like their father, and then he accompanies Esther, Ada, and Mr. Jarndyce to Bleak House. They are there only a short time before Sir Leicester pays an unexpected visit. He has begun to assure both Skimpole and Mr. Jarndyce that they are always welcome to Dedlock Mansion. Sir Leicester has reason to believe that Skimpole, not long ago, while examining some of the Dedlock's family portraits, was inadvertently made to feel unwelcome. Is there afraid that the subject of the family portraits might lead to some remark that might betray her mother, is generally relieved when Sir Leicester leaves. Afterwards, she talked in private with her guardian and tells him that she knows about her mother. In turn, she learns from Mr. Jarndyce that Bythorns was once in love with Lady Dedlock's sister, Miss Barbary, the woman who raised Esther. Miss Barbary broke her engagement in order to raise Esther. Summary. For fear of increasing her mother's peril, Esther refrained from writing to her or trying to see her. Worried about Skimpole's influence on Richard, she and Ada discuss their situation with Mr. Jarndyce. Jarndyce says that in order to understand Skimpole better, the three of them should visit the infant in his home. This home, where Skimpole lives with his sickly wife and three daughters, is a dirty, dingy, dilapidated place. Mr. Jarndyce asks Skimpole to refrain from allowing Richard to give him any money or to buy anything for Skimpole. Skimpole introduces his daughters, who are much like their father, and then accompanies Esther and Ada and Mr. Jarndyce to Bleak House. They are there only a short time before Sir Leicester pays an unexpected visit. He has come to assure that Skimpole and Mr. Jarndyce that they are always welcome to Dedlock Mansion. Sir Leicester has reason to believe that Skimpole, not long ago, while examining some of the Dedlock's family portraits, was inadvertently made to feel unwelcome. Is there afraid that the subject of the family portrait might lead to some remark that might betray her mother, is greatly relieved when Sir Leicester leaves. Afterwards, she talks in private with her guardian and tells him what she knows about her mother. In turn, she learns from Jarndyce that Bythorn was once in love with Lady Dedlock's sister, Miss Barbary, the woman who raised Esther. Miss Barbary broke her engagement in order to raise Esther. Analysis. Here again is a microcosm of Dickens' serio-comic art. Now remember, Dickens, microcosm of Dickens' serio-comic art. Dickens' serio-comic art, please remember. Most of the chapter is devoted to a comic portrait of Skimpole and his daughters, a subject of almost completely irrelevant to the novel's main line of action, yet present also the important motive of Lady Dedlock's peril and Richard's continuing irresponsibility about money and association. Summary and analysis, chapter 44. Mr. Jarndyce promises to assist Esther and her mother in every way possible. He agrees that Tuckinghorn is a dangerous person. In the same conversation, Mr. Jarndyce tells Esther that 1 week later she should send Carley to his room for a letter which he will have written by then. Summary. Chapter 45. Bleak House. Summary and analysis, chapter 45. Walls, Richard's attorney, appears unexpectedly at Bleak House. Paul's Richard's attorney appears unexpectedly at Bleak House one morning. The news he bears is that Richard is broke and may lose his RV commission. Summary. Paul's Richard's attorney appears unexpectedly at Bleak House one morning. The news he bears is that Richard is broke and may lose his army commission. Esther goes to visit Richard at Dale in Kent, taking Carlyle with her, as well as a letter in which Ada offers Richard her inheritance. Esther finds Richard almost unhinged. He wants to go to London with her and try once again to expedite the chancery suit. As they leave Kent, they accidentally meet Alan Woodcourt, who had just returned from India. Alan promises Esther that he will befriend Richard and try to be a good influence on him. Esther perceives that Alan is compassionate about her illness, ravaged face. Inwardly, she welcomes his concern. Dickens knew that most of his readers would prefer to see some romance in Esther's life, despite the many virtue of going John Dias, and Dickens has hinted all along that Alan Woodcourt finds Esther much to his liking. Hence, to prevent a possible sag in his readers' interest, Dickens brings Alan onto the scene again immediately after Esther's acceptance of her guardian's proposal. Meanwhile, Richard moves closer and closer towards a bad end. Now, in chapter 45, John Dias proposes Esther Summer's son, and she agrees for the proposal of marriage with John Dias. Chapter Summary and Analysis, Chapter 46. Walking in Tom all alone towards dawn, Alan Woodcourt sees a woman, Jenny, the brickmaker's wife from St. Albans, with a badly bruised forehead. She allows him to treat it. Continuing his walk, he catches a glimpse of a shabbily dressed boy, Joe, whom he vaguely remembers. A few moments later, he sees the boy being chased by Jenny, thinking that Joe may have robbed her. Alan chases and finally catches the boy. Jenny, however, only wanted to talk to him. Earlier, she had brought medicine for him and nursed him when he was ill with the sickness that eventually infected Esther. Summary. Walking in Tom alone towards dawn, Alan Woodcourt sees a woman, Jenny, the brickmaker's wife from St. Albans. With a badly bruised forehead, she allows him to treat it. Continuing his walk, he catches a glimpse of a shabbily dressed boy, Joe, whom he vaguely remembers. A few moments later, he sees the boy being chased by Jenny, thinking that Joe may have robbed her. Alan chases and finally catches the boy. Jenny, however, only wanted to talk to him. Earlier, she had brought medicine for him and nursed him when he was ill with the sickness that eventually infected Esther. Joe tells his story. He ran away from the young lady Esther, who had taken charge of him during his fever, and was then found by Detective Bucket, who took him to a hospital. The doctors tell Joe to come with him and to leave Tom all alone and emerge into purer air. Analysis. The encountering Jenny and Joe, Alan Woodcourt is drawn more closely into Esther's concern. The chapter satisfies the reader's curiosity about the disappearance of Joe. Summary and Analysis, Chapter 47. Alan and Joe continues to walk at a breakfast stall. Joe, although he has become a starveling, is able to eat only a tiny amount. Examining the boy, Alan finds him quite ill and gives him a little wine, which helps. Joe is then able to eat, and he does so. He tells the doctor the adventure of the lady in the veil and all its consequences. Uncertain of where to find a place of temporary refuge for the boy, Alan locates Miss Flight. She suggests George's shooting gallery. Joe's fear of Bucket is somewhat eased when George and Phil's squad volunteer to take care of boy. George himself is preoccupied with possibility that Tuckinghorn will close him down because of death. Snagsby visits Joe and gives him 4 half-crowns. The child remains confused about the identities of Lady Dedlock, Esther, and Hortense. He knows no prayer and yet says that it's time for me to go down to that there burying ground. Alan begins to say the Lord Prayer. Joe dies after repeating a few phrases of summary. Alan and Joe continues to walk at a breakfast stall. Joe, although he has become a starveling, is able to eat only a tiny amount. Examining the boy, Alan finds him quite ill and gives him a little wine, which helps. Joe is then able to eat, and he does so. He tells the doctor the adventure of Lady in the Vale, with all its consequences. Uncertain of where to find a place of temporary refuge for the boy, Alan locates his flight. She suggests George's shooting gallery. Joe's fear of Bucket is somewhat eased when George and Phil's squad volunteer to take care of the boy. George himself is preoccupied with the possibility that Tuckinghorn will close him down because of that. Next visit Joe and give him 4 half-crown. The child remains confused about the identities of Lady Dedlock, Easter and Hortense. He knows no prayer and yet senses that it's time for me to go down to that there burying ground. Alan begins to say the Lord's Prayer. Joe dies after repeating a few phrases of it. Analysis. By what he learns from Joe, Alan Woodcourt is drawn more deeply into matter that most intensely concern Easter. Dickens' portrayal of the death of innocent children were favorably received by a reader in his day. In the death of Joe, Dickens implies the callousness and improvisation of London. A summary and analysis of chapter 48. In the peril of her life, Lady Dedlock is resolved nerve to yield or drop. She continues to appear as before in high society and arranges for Rosa to leave. This latter action surprises and dismays Tuckinghorn as he tells Lady Dedlock that their agreement is no longer in the force. He will not yet, he says, reveals her secret past to Sir Leicester tonight, but he feels free to inform him at any time after this. Just before 10 o'clock the same night, Tuckinghorn is found dead. He has been shot through the heart. Summary. In the peril of her life, Lady Dedlock is resolved nerve to yield or droop. She continues to appear as before in high society and arranges for Rosa to leave. This latter action surprises and dismays Tuckinghorn, and he tells Lady Dedlock that their agreement is no longer in force. He will not, he says, reveals her secret past to Sir Leicester tonight, but he feels free to inform him at any time after this. Just before 10 o'clock the same night, Tuckinghorn is found dead. He has been shot through the heart. Analysis. Without a confidant or a confessor, lonely Lady Dedlock nevertheless continues to show admirable strength of character. The demise of the vicious Tuckinghorn balances that of the likable Joe and provides some much needed relief from what seems, through the book thus far, an almost uninterrupted triumph of gloom, trouble and bad ends. Of course, the lawyer's death immediately caused that story to become in part a murder mystery. Summary and analysis of chapter 48. In the peril of her life, Lady Dedlock is resolved nerve to yield or drop. She continues to appear as before in high society and arrange for Rosa to leave. This latter action surprises and dismays Tuckinghorn, and he tells Lady Dedlock that their agreement is no longer in force. He will not, he says, reveal her secret past to Sir Leicester tonight, but he feels free to inform him at any time after this. Just before 10 o'clock the same night, Tuckinghorn is found dead as he has been shot through the heart. Summary. In the peril of her life, Lady Dedlock is resolved never to yield or drop. She continues to appear as before in high night and arrange for Rosa to leave. This latter action surprises and dismays Tuckinghorn, and he tells Lady Dedlock that their agreement is no longer in force. He will not, he says, reveals her secret past to Sir Leicester tonight, but he feels free to inform him at any time after this. Just before 10 o'clock the same night, Tuckinghorn is found dead. He has been shot through the heart. Analysis. Without a confidant or a confessor, the lonely Lady Dedlock nevertheless continues to show admirable strength of character. The demise of the vicious Tuckinghorn balances that of the likable Joe and provides some much needed relief from what seems through the book thus far an almost uninterrupted triumph of gloom, trouble and bad ends. Of course, the lawyer's death immediately causes the story to become in part a murder mystery. Summary and analysis of chapter 49. Mr. Bagnet is preparing a birthday dinner for his wife. George Rouncewell has been invited at precisely 4:30 in the afternoon. He arrives, still somewhat distracted and depressed by the death of little Joe, but also delighted to be in a company of amiable all friends. Summary. Mr. Bagnet is preparing a birth dinner for his wife. George Rouncewell had been invited at precisely 4:30 in the afternoon. He arrives, still somewhat distracted and depressed by the death of little Joe, but also delighted to be in company of admirable old friend. Unannounced and unexpected, Detective Bucket appears. Detective Bucket appears extremely congenial. He ingratiates himself with the whole group, including the children. He notices that George seems distracted. They leave together and Bucket arrests George on the charge of having murdered Tuckinghorn, who had on one occasion cried out, "A threatening, murdering, dangerous fellow," word referring to Gridley but taken to refer to George. George is put in jail. Bucket collects the handsome reward offered by Sir Leicester for the capture of his lawyer's murder. Analysis. Now let's come to the plot continues to develop much like a detective story. Bucket character becomes more distinct. However, there is no sense of climax here. The reader is virtually certain that George cannot be Tuckinghorn's killer. Summary and analysis. Chapter 50. Caddy and Prince Turveydrop have a baby girl, but Caddy is ill and feels sure that she will get better if Easter visits her. Easter makes 3 visits and then Mr. Jarndyce suggests that it would be more convenient all around if he, Ada and Easter all went to London for a protracted stay. He also makes arrangement for Alan Woodcourt to become Caddy's doctor. Summary. Caddy and Prince Turveydrop have a baby girl, but Caddy is ill and feels sure that she will get better if Easter visits her. Easter makes 3 visits and then Mr. Jarndyce suggests that it would be more convenient all around if he, Ada and Easter all went to London for a protected stay. He also makes arrangement for Alan Woodcourt to become Caddy's doctor. Alan and Easter meet frequently. Eventually, Easter tells Ada and Caddy about Mr. Jarndyce's proposal of marriage. Caddy recovers her health. Alan seems half inclined for another voyage. Easter notices a slight change, a quiet sorrow in Ada's behavior, but cannot determine its cause. Analysis. Caddy's illness becomes the means by which Easter and Alan get to know each other better. Our curiosity is around about the unexplained change in Ada. A summary and analysis. Chapter 51. As soon as the Alan Woodcourt arrived in London, he went to Mr. Holmes to get Richard's address. On that day, the pompous wordy Holmes relentlessly pursued the theme that Richard need money, as does Holmes, if he is to continue at Richard's legal counsel. Learning finally that Richard lives next door upstairs, Alan visited him and finds the young man haggard and dejected. He has made no progress with his interest in the Chancery suit, but quite agreeable to receive advice and direction from Alan. When Easter suggests to Ada that they visit Richard, Ada is at first hesitant and acts strangely, as she has tears in her eyes and love in her face. When they do visit Richard, Ada reveals that she has been his wife for 2 months and will not be returning to Bleak House. Easter reveals that marriage to Mr. Jarndyce and he accepts it calmly, but pities the two and twice remarks that Bleak House is thinning fast. Summary. As soon as Alan Woodcourt arrives in London, he went to Mr. Holmes to get Richard's address. On that day, the pompous, wordy Holmes relentlessly pursues the theme that Richard need money, as does Holmes if he is to continue to Richard's legal counsel. Learning finally that Richard lives next door upstairs, Alan visits him and finds the young man haggard and dejected. He has made no progress with his interest in the Chancery suit, but quite agreeable to receive advice and direction from Alan. When Easter suggests to Ada that they visit Richard, Ada is at first hesitant and acts strangely. She has tears in her eyes and love in her face. When they do visit Richard, Ada reveals that she has been his wife for 2 months and will not be returning to Bleak House. Easter reveals the marriage to Mr. Jarndyce and accepts it calmly, but pities the two and twice remarks that Bleak House is thinning fast. Analysis. Dickens' further exposure of the necessary and hypocritical holes enables him to continue his critique of the persons and institutions of the law. The marriage of Ada and Richard in some unpropitious circumstances darken the story's atmosphere further, as it now seems inevitable that Richard's ominous future will also be Adas. Summary and analysis, chapter 52. Alan Woodcock believes in George Rouncewell's innocence but point out that circumstantial evidence is strongly against the accused. Easter, Alan and Mr. Jarndyce and the other baronet visit George in prison and are dismayed at his refusal to have lawyer. He wants his own innocence, not legal maneuverings to clear his name. He watches Easter closely as he leaves and then to Mr. Jarndyce on the night of the murder. A figure like hers went past him on dark staircase. Mrs. Bagnet visits George's mother, hoping that she will be able to persuade her son to accept legal counsel. Summary. Alan Woodcock believes in George Rouncewell's innocence but points out that circumstantial evidence is strongly against the accused. Easter, Alan and Mr. Jarndyce and the other baronet visit George in prison and are dismayed at his refusal to have a lawyer. He wants his own innocence, not legal maneuvering to clear his name. He watches Easter closely as she leaves, then tells Mr. Jarndyce that on night of the murder, a figure like hers went past him on the dark staircase. Mrs. Bagnet visits George's mother, hoping that she will be able to persuade her son to accept legal counsel. Analysis. After an intermission of 2 chapters, Dickens, the artist, sensed that continuity demands a return to the murder mystery. Drama is heightened by George's perilous obstinacy. A possible major piece of the puzzle turns up when George remarks about the figure he saw but could not identify. Summary and analysis of chapter 53 and 54. Bucket is an amiable man of goodwill but dodged in pursuit. At present, he wanders far and wide, closely observing a multitude of people, places, and things. Summary. Bucket is an amiable man of goodwill but dodged in pursuit. At present, he wanders far and widely, close observing a multitude of people, place, and things. At Tuckinghorn funeral, he sits behind the lattice blind of carriage and scans the crowd that has gathered in Lincoln Field. After the funeral, he visits the deadlock where he is always welcome. His conversation with Sir Leicester, Volumnia and other is mostly small talk. But as he leaves, he questions the footman, Mercury, about Lady Dedlock's habit. He learns that on the night of the murder, she took a lone walk. The next morning, Bucket tells Sir Leicester that his wife is a suspect. Sir Leicester, dumbfounded when he learns of his wife's former lover, of her visit to his grave and of the bad blood between her and Tuckinghorn. The Smallweed, Snagsby and Chadband arrives and bear the news that love letters to Captain Howdown from Honoria were discovered at Crook's shop. Read by grandfather Smallweed and then turn over to Tuckinghorn. All of the new arrivals hope to make money one way to another out of Lady Dedlock's trouble and Tuckinghorn's death. Bucket dismisses them and then arrests Millie. Hot tense, he summarizes her relationship with Tuckinghorn and her appearance in Lady Dedlock's clothes. Before Little Joe, Bucket's wife kept watch on Hortense and can prove that the French woman wrote letter accusing Lady Dedlock. Both George Rouncewell and Lady Dedlock visit Tuckinghorn on the night of murder, but both were blameless. Hortense later threw the murder weapon in a small lake. Bucket recovered the gun by having the lake dragged. All this is such a shock for Sir Leicester that he suffers a stroke. Analysis. At this point, the detective story aspect of the book reaches its completion, still prompting the reader to read on. However, is among other things, the unknown fate of Lady Dedlock. Bucket proves to be an intrepid sleuth. Although his man work is over, he will continue to play an active role in subsequent events, both in defending his wife's honor and afterwards in reading her with compassion and without a reproach. Sir Leicester shows hitherto unsuspected virtue even as he succumbed to a stroke. Summary and analysis of chapter 55. Mrs. Bagnet brings Mr. Rouncewell to George's prison cell, where mother and son are happily reunited after many years of separation. George consents to accept a defense lawyer. Mr. Bucket brings Mrs. Rouncewell to George's prison cell, where mother and son are happily reunited after many years of separation. George consents to accept a defense lawyer. When Mrs. Rouncewell goes to Dedlock's house, she tells Lady Dedlock that George is being held for Tuckinghorn's murder. She also knows Lady Dedlock, a letter giving a printed newspaper account of the discovery of Tuckingham's body and bearing under the account Lady Dedlock's name in the word murderess. Mr. Guppy arrives, warns her that Howdown's letter, which he thought were destroyed, are now held by the Smallweed, and he tells her father that grandfather's Smallweed, we will probably use them to try to extract money from her. Guppy is protective of Lady Dedlock in accordance with the promise he made to Esther. When Guppy leaves, Lady Dedlock is seized with horror. The Tulkinghorn, though dead, remains a menacing figure. Even in death, he pursues her. She writes a brief letter to Sir Leicester explaining her own motives and movements on the night of Tulkinghorn's murder. She treats that she is innocent of Tulkinghorn's murder, but that she is not innocent of anything else that you have heard or will hear. Then she veils the dress quickly, leave all her jewels and her money, and exit the house. Analysis. The reunion of George Rouncewell and his mother tries up one of the loose end of the subplot and provide another occasion for Dickens to provide his early readers with something many of them delighted in, the effusive expression of virtuous domestic sentiment. Once again, Mr. Guppy, although still somewhat absurd, appear in a rather favourable light. Lady Dedlock follows the pattern so often found in classical tragedy because she lacks certain virtual information. Her husband's forgiveness, Hortense's arrest, she makes a fatal decision. Her character, however, is sufficiently deep or noble to create the compelling effect of high tragedy. She is a figure of pathos. Summary and analysis, chapter 56. Not alone after Lady Dedlock has left the house, Volumnia, a cousin in her 60s, discovers Sir Leicester unconscious on the floor of the library. He has had a stroke. Recovering somewhat but still unable to speak distinctly, he writes "My Lady" on the slate and is told that she has gone out. After reading her letter, he commissions Bucket to find her and give her his message, full forgiveness. The detective reassures all Mrs. Rouncewell that her son George is discharged honorable. Then he searched Lady Dedlock's room for clues that might help him locate her. He finds and keeps the signatured handkerchief that Esther left in Brickmaker's house, the one that Lady Dedlock discovered there. Bucket then goes on to shooting gallery and gets Esther dressed from George. He then visits Mr. Jarndyce, explains his mission, and asks him to allow Esther to go with him in search of her mother. Meanwhile, Lady Dedlock is wandering in the area of Brickmaker's Clint's at St. Albans. Summary: Not long after Lady Dedlock has left the house, Volumnia, a cousin in her 60s, discovers Sir Leicester unconscious on the floor of the library. He has had a stroke. Recovering somewhat but still unable to speak distinctly, he writes "My Lady" on the slate and is told that she has gone out. After reading her letter, he commissions Bucket to find her and give her his message, full forgiveness. The detective reassures old Mrs. Rouncewell that her son George is discharged honorable. Then he searched Lady Dedlock's room for clues that might help her locate her. He finds and keeps the signature handkerchief that Esther left in a brickmaker's house, the one that Lady Dedlock discovers there. Bucket then goes on to shooting gallery and gets Esther dressed from George. He then visits Mrs. Jarndyce, explains his mission, and asks him to allow Esther to go with him in search of her mother. Meanwhile, Lady Dedlock is wandering in area of Brickmaker's Clint in St. Albans. Analysis: Bucket continues to be impressive as a skillful detective who is also a polite and warm-hearted human being. Sir Leicester continues to show only his better side. The story now turns into worried, rather desperate rescue efforts. A summary and analysis, chapter 57. Bucket and Esther set out on their search. They stop first at police station where a detective gives a description of Lady Dedlock. They search far and wide through the dock area, then proceed to St. Albans. At the tea stop, Bucket learns that a figure like the one he seeks has gone on ahead. Explain to Esther that he has himself removed Joe and St. Albans some time ago to keep this very matter of Lady Dedlock quiet. He also tells how he was assisted by Skimpole, who accepted a £5 bribe. Summary: Bucket and Esther set out on their search Bucket and Bucket and Easter set out on their search. They stop first at a police station where a detective gives a description of Lady Dedlock. They search far and wide through the dock area, then proceed to St. Albans. At a tea shop, Bucket learns that figure like that one he seeks has gone on ahead. He explained to Easter that he himself removed Jaw and from St. Albans some time ago to keep this very matter of Lady Dedlock quiet. He also tells how he was assisted by Skimpole, who accepted a £5 bribe. Jenny, they learn, has gone to London, so thinking that they might learn something far from. Bucket and Easter go back to city. Analysis. Dickens uses the search of Lady Dedlock partly as a way of giving a further display of his detective's shrewdness and persistence, and partly a way of clearing up the mystery of Joe's disappearance from St. Albans after Easter took charge of him. In any assistance of Skimpole's character, a Bucket comments about him would have to be taken in account. Summary and analysis, chapter 58. While Sir Leicester lies ill at his own town house, the high society in which Dedlock move is rife with rumours about them. Sir Leicester, though still seriously ill, waits expectantly for Bucket to return. He wants to be sure that the house is in cheerful readiness for Lady Dedlock. George Rouncewell and his mother discuss the absence of Lady Dedlock. The mother feels certain that Lady Dedlock will never more set foot within these walls. The lady's empty room, bereft of a familiar presence, seems oppressively dark and cold. Summary. While Sir Leicester lies ill at his town house, the high society in which Dedlock moves is rife and rumour about them. Sir Leicester, though still seriously ill, waits expectantly for the Bucket to return. He wants to be sure that the house is in cheerful readiness of Lady Dedlock. George Rouncewell and his mother discuss the absence of Lady Dedlock. The mother feels certain that Lady Dedlock will never more set foot within these walls. The lady, empty room, bereft a familiar presence, seems oppressively dark and cold. Sir Leicester wishes to see George. When George arrives, he lifts the stricken man up and puts him close to one of the windows so that he can have a better view of the driving snow and sleet. Sir Leicester wants to make it clear to all that he remains on unaltered term with his wife. Relentless and wakeful throughout the night, he is watched over the care of with tender devotion by the stalwart George. Analysis. A portrayal of Sir Leicester as a touchingly regenerated personality continues. This chapter shows Dickens' masterly ability to modulate from one tone to a quite different one. The chapter commences on a note of sarcastic social satire, but develops into scenes of atmospheric colon, foreboding, and then into expression of deeply realized and this time sentimentalized human warmth and tenderness. Not very important in terms of plot, this chapter shows Dickens at the height of powers in rendering of atmosphere and feeling. I repeat, human and warm tenderness, not very important in terms of plot. This chapter shows Dickens at the height of powers in the rendering of atmosphere and feeling. Please listen the chapter again. Summary and analysis. At 3 a.m. after a hard hurried journey, Bucket and Easter reach London again. Searching through many shabby streets, Bucket eventually passes on to Chancery Lane where, by accident, they meet Alan Woodcourt, who has been attending Richard, described by Alan as not ill but depressed and faint. Bucket drives the coach to Snagsby Place. He thinks that the Guster, the servant, has a letter somewhere that will assist him in his search. Summary. At 3 a.m. after a hard-hurried journey, Bucket and Easter reach London again. Searching through many shabby streets, Bucket eventually passes on to Chancery Lane, where by accident they meet Alan Woodcourt, who has been attending Richard, described by Alan as not ill but dressed and depressed and faint. Bucket drives the coach to Snagsby's place. He thinks that Guster, the servant, has a letter somewhere that will assist him in his search. Guster is in one of her fits. Bucket assigns Alan the task of extracting the letter from her. In the meantime, the detective reproaches Mrs. Snagsby for the folly of being jealous of her husband. The doctor obtains the letter and passes it on to Bucket, who in turn asks Easter to read it. It is a letter from her mother saying that she is on her way to the place where she has chosen to die. Guster confesses that she encountered a wretchedly dressed stranger who asked her how to find the paupers' buying ground. Buckets and Easter hurry to that place and find what seems to be the body of Jenny at the gate. Easter discovers, however, that the dead woman dressed in Jenny's clothes is not Jenny. It is Easter's mother, Lady Dedlock, cold and dead. Analysis. Here ends one of the book's central action, The Mystery of Lady Dedlock's Secret. Dickens must now devote his attention in a few chapters remaining to bringing the other main lines of action to a close. Easter and Alan must be brought together, and the fate of Richard and Ada remain to be clarified. Summary and analysis. Chapter 60. Easter falls ill and is attended by Alan to keep her and herself closely in touch with Ada and Richard. Mr. Jarndyce decides to remain in London for an extended period of time and invite Alan's mother as a guest. Alan has decided to forego his projected long voyage. Mr. Jarndyce helps him secure an appointment in Yorkshire, where he will provide medical care for the poor. Summary. Easter falls ill and is attended by Alan to keep her and herself close in touch with Ada and Richard. Mr. Jarndyce decided to remain in London for an extended period of time and invite Alan's mother as a guest. Alan has decided to forego his projected long voyage. Mr. Jarndyce helps him secure an appointment in Yorkshire, where he will provide medical care for the poor. Easter often visits Ada, who loves for Richard, remain as strong as forever, despite his poverty and dismal prospect. Richard is languid, unkept and distracted. Now you can remember these characteristics of Richard. Richard is languid, unkept and distracted. Easter summarized that he has lost faith in holes. Ada's greatest fear is that Richard will not live longer enough to see the child she is now carrying. Analysis. Dickens now prepared for us to Richard's seemingly imminent demise. The constant presence of the Alan Woodcourt also prepare us for another imminent event, his engagement to Easter. Summary and analysis. Chapter 11. Easter now visits Ada every day, and on 2 or 3 occasions she finds Skimpole there. She thinks that it is likely that Skimpole is continuing to help Richard spend money foolishly. She also sensed that Skimpole's careless gaiety is vexing to Ada in her difficult situation. Summary. Easter now visits Ada every day, and on 2 or 3 occasions she finds Skimpole there. She thinks that it is likely that Skimpole is continuing to help Richard spend money foolishly. She also sensed that Skimpole's careless gaiety is vexing to Ada in her difficult situation. Easter goes to see Skimpole and reproaches him for accepting a bribe to betray Joe's presence to Bleak House to Bucket. Skimpole defends himself with his usual reasoning. Mr. Jarndyce becomes highly critical of Skimpole's behavior. 5 years later, when Skimpole dies, the dilettante leaves a diary in which he says that Mr. Jarndyce, like most other men I have known, is an incarnation of selfishness. As the month goes by, Richard, still haunting the Chancery Court day after, becomes more haggard and often sinks into an alarming lethargy of mind and body. Alan Woodcourt walks Easter home one night and tells her that he loves her. Easter's first thought is too late, but then she considers that thought to be ungrateful. To Mr. Jarndyce, she tells Alan she is not free to think of his love. Alan is understanding, and the two part without unhappiness. Alan promises that he will continue to look after Richard. The story continues to hold the reader's interest because several lines of the action remain to be resolved. Among them, the fate of Richard and Ada and the relationship between Easter and Alan. The fact that Easter has even meant for regret. Regret about her prison prior coming to Mr. Jarndyce make her seem more lifelike. Readers are glad to see Skimpole exposed at last as fraud and parasitic ingrate that he truly is. Summary and analysis, chapter 62. The next morning, Esther tells Mr. Jarndyce, I will be the mistress of Bleak House when you please. Mr. Jarndyce says, next month then. Summary. The next morning, Esther tells Mr. Jarndyce, I will be the mistress of Bleak House when you please. Mr. Jarndyce says, next month then. At that moment, Bucket and Grandfather Smallweed appear. Smallweed has discovered a signed with the date, will dated later than the wills already examined in the Jarndyce and Jarndyce suit. The new will reduces Mr. Jarndyce's interest considerably but advances those of the Richard and Ada. Mr. Kengi, to whom the new document is given, show that it will carry much weight when, in the month's time, it is introduced in court. Analysis. Even though Esther and Mr. Jarndyce have agreed to be married the following month, Dickens has made such a strong case for Alan Woodcourt that we suspect that some development yet to come will make it possible for Alan to triumph. The newly discovered Jarndyce will intensify our interest in the court case. Summary and analysis, chapter 63. George Rouncewell has given up shooting. Gallery is now a constant companion to Sir Leicester. One day, however, he rides north through the iron country and visits his brother. He also meets his newspaper, What Rouncewell and What Bright to Be. Rosa, George is offered to job, turns it down, but agrees to give Rosa away at the wedding. Then he writes to Esther, telling her in order to put her mind to rest. Then the letter written to him long ago by Captain Howdown, the one taken by Detective Bucket, was not of no particular consequences. Summary. George Rouncewell has given up shooting gallery and is now a constant companion to Sir Leicester. One day, however, he rides north through the iron country and visits his brother. He also meets his new nephew, What Rouncewell, and What's Bright to Be, Rosa. George is offered a job, turn it down, but agrees to give Rosa away at the wedding. And then he writes to Esther, telling her in order to put her mind to rest. Then that the letter to him, written to him long ago by Captain Howdown, and the one taken by Detective Bucket, was not of no particular consequences. Analysis. Rouncewell, all good people are being rewarded with happy ending. The lines of action involving them are now drowning to a conclusion. One more glimpse of the capable, kind-hearted George will be gained. Summary and analysis, chapter 64. Mr. Jarndyce has gone to Yorkshire to see Alan Woodcourt. Soon he invites Esther to join them. He has settled Alan in a new Bleak House and released Esther from her promise, having seen for some time that she will be far happier with Alan. Esther is astonished she will still become the mistress of Bleak House, but with Alan as her husband. Summary. Mr. Jarndyce has gone to Yorkshire to see Alan Woodcourt. Soon he invites Esther to join them. He has settled Alan in a new Bleak House and released Esther from her promise, having seen for some time that she will be far happier with Alan Woodcourt. Esther is astonished she will still become the mistress of Bleak House, but with Alan as her husband. During their absence from St. Albans, Mr. Guppy has called 3 times. When they return, he calls again, accompanied by his mother and Jobling. Finding that the image of Esther still haunted him, he renews his proposal of marriage. Mr. Jarndyce, speaking for Esther, rejects the proposal. Guppy behaves well enough, but his mother is outraged because becomes insulting and has to be forcibly removed by her son and Jobling. Analysis. Here began the happy ending of Esther and Alan, and even for Mr. Jarndyce to become a Prospero figure. She Shakespeare's The Tempest, secretly pulling many strings to create a surprising and joyous culminations of the events. The visit of Guppy by his mother may be a superfluous addition to the story, though it does lend credibility to the fact that Esther's good look are returning. Summary and analysis of chapters 65 and 66. The Jarndyce and Jarndyce case is finally ready to come up, this time at Westminster Hall in London. On their way to Westminster, Esther and Alan meet Carrie passing by in a carriage. Summary. Jarndyce and Jarndyce case is finally ready to come up. This time at Westminster Hall in London. On their way to Westminster, Easton and Alan meet Caddy passing by in a carriage. At Westminster Hall, they learn that the legal costs have exhausted the entire worthy of the estate. The shock is too much for the already ill Richard, though resolved to start life afresh. To begin the world, reconciled at last with Mr. Jarndyce. He dies the same day. Miss Flight comes sweeping in Easter. The poor crazed woman has set her birds free. Lady Dedlock has been buried unobtrusively in a family mausoleum at Chesney Wold. How she died is a mystery. Sir Leicester, riding on the estate with George Rouncewell, constantly honor her memory and her burial place. He and Bythorne still quarrel over the disputed thoroughfare, but in a way that gives satisfaction to both. George and Phil Squad have a permanent residence in one of the lodge of the parks. Chesney Wold, now headed only by an aging widower, settled in a dull response. Sir Leicester himself will live only a little longer. In the evening, Volumnia reads political treatise to him. She discovers that she will inherit the estate. Analysis. Things go according to Dickens's foreshadowing. Jarndyce and Jarndyce comes to nothing. Richard pays for his persistent folly. Sir Leicester remains firm in his dignity and touching in his devotion to Lady Dedlock. In the description of a changed and subdued Chesney Wold, Dickens' art of creating atmosphere or mood by describing house and grounds in changing light and season asserts himself triumphantly once more. Summary and analysis, chapter 67. For full 7 happy years, Easter has been mistress of New Bleak House. She and Alan have 2 daughters, Ada and child Richard, was born very shortly after his father's death. The boy and his mother throve in the doing so made Easter the happiest of the happy. Miss Jarndyce tells Ada that both Bleak House are her home, but at the older claim priority. Summary. The full 7 happy years, Easter has been mistress of the New Bleak House. She and Alan have 2 daughters. Ada's child, Richard, was born very shortly after his death. The boy and his mother throve, and in doing so, made Easter the happiest of the happy. Mr. Jarndyce tells Ada that both Bleak House are her home, but that the older claim priority. Easter's maid, Carley Neckett, has married a miller. Her younger sister, Emma, is now Easter's helper. Dissatisfied with the results of her efforts on behalf of Africa, Mrs. Jellyby has turned her energies in support of the right of women to sit in Parliament. Caddy is fresh and happy despite the fact that her husband, Prince, is lame and her child deaf and dumb. Peppy Jellyby is in the custom home and doing extremely well. Old Mr. Tarvedrop remains a model of deportment. Easter and Alan have built a little Growley and Mr. Jarndyce. Mr. Jarndyce is as helpful and happy ever. Easter finds Ada more beautiful, and according to Alan, Easter himself is prettier than ever before. So this is a last analysis. At last look at several minor characters ties up all remaining loose ends. Dickens' conclusion is written in such a way as to evoke poignantly the sense of time past linking with uptime. The final note is that of the continuity and strength of the goodness that dominates in surviving and successors and makes the future propitious. So this is the end of Bleak House. Thank you so much.